Welcome to The Problematic Gaze with me, Dave Moore.
And me, Dr. Lee Arnott. Each episode, we will take a piece of pop culture and examine it through the problematic lens. Is it problematic? Why is it problematic? Is it not problematic? And what does that say about society and culture then and now?
If you want to follow us, we're on X and Instagram. So give us a follow and like or review wherever you get your podcasts, please. How are you, Lee?
I'm not so bad, thanks. You?
Very good, very good. I'm just recovering from a little visit from my little 3-year-old niece this weekend. Went very well, but...
Someone else was invited for the weekend, it wasn't me.
I know, darling. But we've got you in the diary, haven't we?
Have we?
I think so.
I went out with my very, very old, dear friend last week who happens to be your husband. And we battered Soho like it was 1997 all over again. I don't think we've actually put anything in the diary. We're put it in the diary like that. I think that's most of our conversation from after. We did that classic thing of being in a bar and thinking it was like nearly home time, and it was like 6:30.
Yeah.
The more things change, the more they fucking stay the same, love, let me tell you. So,
yes, but normally what it would have been years ago is that you're rolling in at 6 o'clock the next day.
Yes. Well, I don't know about that, love. By your optimism.
Yeah, so I've got you to thank for my husband rolling in at 10 in the evening after having caught the train from London. He brought me a donut, though.
Was it only 10 o'clock he got home?
It was 10 o'clock, yeah, but didn't you meet at 4?
I thought we'd left at like midnight.
Yeah, I got a picture at some point in the evening of you talking to 2 random Americans in the bar, and my first thought was, rather than be jealous that you're chatting up Americans, my first thought was, I pity them 2 Americans.
Yeah, really, their ears were bleeding by the end of it, God love them. I mean, I can't know what we're talking about, but we were fucking hilarious.
I'm sure you were.
Dear. Anyway, I've been rather distressed by this hideous riot taking place across the country this week. You know, the contrast, let's not get political about this, but the contrast between all these marvellous people in Paris at the Olympics doing amazing things compared to what's going on, you know, and these riots, which are just basically anti-immigration and hijacked by the far right and just become this kind of racist cesspit, you know, amplified by social media and news and media. Oh, it's awful. Just have to keep reminding ourselves, darling, that most people in this country are decent. I just want everybody to be all right, you know, and I don't get what they want to take the country back to. Well, I do know what they want to take the country back to. They want to take it back to imperialism when everybody was white and everybody was miserable, which doesn't really exist. It's just a load of nonsense, you know. You want to go back to when England was purely English, then I'm sorry, love, but it doesn't actually exist because everybody came from a little part of Africa millions of years ago, blah, 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 you know. And our culture is a hybrid of so many different cultures, and it's ridiculous, it's pathetic.
Yeah, I think what we've got to take heart in is the equal or even higher amount of people who are coming out to tell them we're not all like that. Yeah. Get back in your box.
Yeah, and it's telling that there's nobody targeting London because they know that in London they would just be like, get out of here. You know?
I'm hearing rumblings of something going on in Walthamstow tomorrow, and just the Twitter traffic going on is like, don't even think about it.
Right, and that's the other thing. Twitter is just unbearable. You know, we've got an account, as you know, Dave, and it's limited. You know, we've limited to people who we like, people who we follow. And even that this week has just been, I've seen Twitters from Tommy fucking Robinson on our Twitter feed, you know, and it's like, how does that get there?
Yeah.
You know, so it's ghastly.
I was listening to something really interesting about Twitter and how they've stopped the likes, you know, so you can't see who's liked a post. And there's kind of rumblings that is because it gives people more license to like things that they necessarily wouldn't like if they knew everybody else could see what they were liking, you know, which also feeds into this fuel. It feels as though the world is tipping on its axis a little bit, and it is distressing. But I mean, let's just take heart in our little podcast and our little world, knowing that our listeners are of a liberal mind and are accepting of each other and all our differences in all their glory.
Hear, hear, darling.
Speaking of
Yes.
which, chewing the fat, I've been listening to another podcast. Obviously, please listen to our podcast first, but if you did want to listen to another podcast that's slightly inferior to ours, then I would recommend I've Had It. It's a podcast, right? So it's these two American ladies, Jennifer Welsh and Angie Sullivan, and they have guests on, etc. And they're basically, their whole premise is I've had it with racists, or I've had it with people who stand in car parking spaces waiting for a car to come along, all that kind of thing. And they're two American ladies. They're from the South. I can't remember exactly where. And you would think by looking at them, and they say this themselves, that they are Southern belles who are MAGAs. And basically, they're the complete antithesis of that. They lay into Trump something rotten. It's very entertaining. And they kind of just, reflect on American culture and society and the rabid Republicans and what's happening to us all, but with a humorous slant. So I'd thoroughly recommend that. I like podcasts where people chew the fat mainly about random shit, which is what we do a little bit at the start, don't we? And then we kind of deep dive into something cerebral and
cultural.
Culture.
Culture, in it.
Speaking of which, shall we just dive in?
Yeah, dive into Julia Roberts and Richard Gere. Yes, please.
It's not the only thing that's dived into Richard Gere by all accounts, is it?
Let's not go there, love. Let's not go there. That's clearly false. But interestingly, those type of smears have always been given against a certain male, and it's a really easy way to smear them is to question their either sexual proclivities or their sexualities, and gerbil stories kind of ticks both boxes, It
is actually quite funny if you think about it.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is, but let's not go there.
Okay, on that note. So, Pretty Woman is a 1990 American romantic comedy directed by Gary Marshall from a screenplay by J.F. Lawton. It stars Richard Gere and Julia Roberts and Laura San Giacomo and Jason Alexander. And the film centres on a Hollywood escort, which we're not using these days, are we? We're going to say sex worker from now on, I think.
Yes, but they very liberally use the word prostitute throughout the film.
Absolutely, and hooker.
They don't even say escort.
Yeah, exactly. But for 2024, eyes and ears, we'll use sex worker. What do you think?
Yeah.
Cool. So the film story centers on a Hollywood sex worker, Vivian Ward, and wealthy businessman, Edward Lewis. Vivian's hired by Edward to be his escort on several businesses and social functions, and their relationship develops during her week-long stay with him. The film's title, Pretty Woman, is based on the 1964 song Oh Pretty Woman by Roy Orbison. Original screenplay was entitled 3000, which referred to the amount of money Edward pays Vivian to spend the week with him, but was later changed to Pretty Woman. So, that's the bones of it. Pretty Woman. Do you remember it first time round?
I absolutely loved this film the first time round. I totally bought into it as a 17-year-old, and I adored it. How about you?
Yeah, I went to see it at the cinema, and I loved it. And I've seen it several times throughout the years. It's a kind of film that if it's on in the background, you won't flick past it. Well, for me anyway, and I'll sit and watch it. Realise that the last time I watched it, which was last night, that there are various problematic elements to it that I hadn't seen before. But in general, I do really love this film.
I'm so sorry, Dave, but I'm about to burst your Pretty Woman bubble because I haven't seen this film since it was released. And I watched it the other day and it left me feeling soiled, dirty. I thought it was a ghastly, exploitative piece of misogyny. So let's see where this takes us. This is going to be fun.
Okay, so now we have only just discussed 1990, haven't we, in our previous episode of Justify My Love? That was only 2 episodes ago, which Justify My Love was also released in 1990. So I don't think we need to dwell too much on the news of the year, do we?
No, I think if anybody wants to know what happened in 1990, go and listen to Justify My Love and then come back and we'll pick up where we left off.
Okay, so I fear as though entering into this, we may have two extremely differing points of view about the film Pretty Woman. But before we do a deep dive into it, let's just take a look at what was going on in the official singles charts. So we're going to look at the official singles charts in the UK from the 18th of March to the 24th of March 1990. Let's start at number 40 and work our way up, shall we?
Oh my God. I've realised reading Don't Be Good to Me that I was working, I think, in the Easter holidays in a scented heart-shaped cushion factory in Byker in Newcastle, and I bought this single. I bought this single with my salary, and I believe, and I worked there in the summer holidays as well, and I used to get £80 a week, and I was rich beyond my wildest dreams at that point.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember
What
that.
was I doing in 1990? I think I was in Scarborough working as a cashier on a chairlift.
Bless you. And that was probably preferable because those heart-shaped cushions were covered in so many chemicals. Used to flare me eczema up rotten.
Uh,
So I used to leave crusty, crusty skin over the cushions before I packed them. So
oh,
if anybody did buy a heart-shaped cushion from Marks and Spencer's in 1990, I can only apologise for the dust that
uh,
erupted as you opened it. There's some corkers in here, actually, isn't there?
yeah,
Blue Savannah Erasure. Okay, we've got Jive Bunny and the Master Mixers at number 4.
okay.
And I think they're coming to the end of their horrific run of success where they just seem to have a different song in the charts all year round. There's a real sense of that summer of love, isn't there? The Strawberry Fields Forever by Candy Flip.
Infinity by Guru Josh.
Yeah, Guru Josh. I'm just looking at that.
Yeah,
I can positively smell the old school ecstasy from this list,
there
really.
is, isn't it? It's just kind of coming out of that acid housey kind of vibe, isn't it, into the
Yeah,
ecstasy era.
yeah. Oh, new in at number 12, The Power by Snap.
Yeah,
Nothing Compares to You, Connor, that's been number 1 earlier. Wow. In Spiral Carpets, They Might Be Giants. Depeche Mode again, okay. Big Fun are back at number 21. Hooray.
just glossing back, number 19, Everything Starts with an E by Easy Posse. I don't
Yeah.
know that song, but obviously that just gives you an indication of what was going around culturally.
Yes, literally going around. Shakin' Stevens is at number 23. He has been at number 18. I'm always amazed at how long Shakin' Stevens, aka Shaky, is actually around on the music scene. He's always got a record in the charts for a long time. I was quite surprised to see him still in the 90s giving it jip.
Bros, Madly in Love. Now, this was, remember when Bros was in their peak, like 1989? They were just everywhere, weren't they? And then it was just like for
Yeah.
one album, and then they released a follow
Yeah.
up album, and it just they kind of came, they went as soon as they came, really, didn't they?
Yeah. Well, did Craig left? Craig the drummer had not the drummer, the guitarist. That he left, and then they released another album that just went.
That rings a bell. Have you seen, just on a tangent, the Bros documentary from I think it's just pre-COVID?
Yes, listeners, if you haven't watched it, it's almost a bit like a version of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, as portrayed by two 80s twin pop star brothers who effectively hate each other but they take themselves far too seriously. It's great, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's an
crossed with
absolute
a little
walker.
bit of This Is Spinal Tap. It's just like if
Yes.
you ever want to watch how fame could warp someone's perception of reality, I'd say go and watch that, but with added comedy elements thrown in as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Unintentionally comedy elements. I like that chart actually. It's one of the ones that I've looked at and go, oh. I've gone right down to the bottom 100 as well. And there is some corkers, but enough. Should we talk about Pretty Woman?
Shall we?
Yeah.
So, okay, so let me just start off before you verbally crucify me. I and I completely understand why you would. I think I'm looking at this through a very nostalgic eyes of a romantic love story, a woman who saves a man from himself.
Mm-hmm.
Just in very simplistic terms, a Cinderella / Pygmalion story.
It's not. Can we talk about that dark fairy tale thing for a moment? One thing that is interesting, you mentioned it was originally called 3000, and it was originally supposed to be a much darker film. And the ending actually had the Julia Roberts character dead and Richard Gere throwing the money on her corpse before he just drives off and leaves her. And I think there were still some tones in the beginning of this movie which kind of show its betray the origin story of it, if you like. But this whole thing about the fairy tale, I mean, the film tries to lay bare that it's telling a fairy tale. And she talks about always dreaming about a knight in shining armor. And she actually says at one point, I want the fairy tale. And she mentions Cinderella. But it struck me, this is an incredibly uneven fairy tale. Maybe fairy tales always are, in which the only one who has any power in this film is the man. And this is a film which is obsessed with money.
Yeah.
The very first line is, it's all about money.
Yeah.
It's the very first line of the movie, A Magician. Yeah. And money is a constant theme. It really struck me. This is from the same kind of film era as Wall Street, as that kind of coming to the end of Reaganomics, if you like, casts a really big shadow over this movie. And the upshot is that it's telling the audience that having money is important. And if you have money, you're able to do anything with it. And characters talk about money all the time. I find it a very vulgar film in lots of ways. And I don't know if that makes you sound like an old-fashioned British person, but aside from the it's all about money opening line, Julia Roberts' character says earlier on, Vivian, says, I never joke about money. There's a discussion of his job and how much he's worth and the money he moves around and the assets and stuff that he's involved with. But the imbalance in their relationship quickly comes to the fore. He says to her, I will pay you to be at my beck and call. She later on makes a joke about how they both screw people for money. At one point, he says, wake up, time to shop. And there's much talk about the $250,000 necklace. So money and its power is a through line throughout this whole movie. And I think one of the key scenes that show his ability to do whatever the fuck he likes because he's rich is when she's in the hotel room and he's downstairs being all depressed and moody playing the piano. Incidentally, Richard Gere, amazing piano player, genuinely, he can play the piano. And she goes down to follow him. There's the waiting staff in the bar waiting, clearly like, come on, love, we've got to fucking want to get home, you know. But he's tinkling the ivories. She comes in, and such is his power and wealth that he's able to tell everybody to bugger off in this busy hotel in Beverly Hills, and then fuck her on the piano. So she's basically this plaything of his, you know. This is the power I've got, and this is how I'm going to use it. You guys can go. I'm going to fuck this lady on the piano while there's room to myself in this big, busy Beverly Hills hotel. So money was the thing that struck me first of all about this movie. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Obviously, the way I saw it was that they talk about transactions and about, you know, what they can offer each other, which I felt, you know, there was a kind of an agreement between them that this is what's going to happen for the week, you know, and as soon as they got in the car, they talked about transactions and her making $100 an hour and him being quite surprised about that was what a sex worker could earn per hour. So it immediately kind of started opening this like conversation about transaction, about how to make money. He became quite intrigued about her, about how she negotiated, as well as her becoming quite fascinated about what he did and stuff. So I felt as though when it came to the request to spend the week with me and she was negotiating her fee, I felt that was quite an equal, honest and open transaction. It's like, you know, he wasn't the only person getting something out of that. She was as well. So I understand what you're kind of saying about, you know, this film's all about money and about entitlement and about greed. Something that struck me, it's just like on an artistic level, about on a design level, is whenever you saw him with in the corporate world, whether he was kind of in meetings, negotiating things and stuff, the colour palette was all very neutral and greys, blacks, whites. it was all very muted, whereas whenever there was a scene with her in it, it was always very colourful. So it kind of showed like a marked contrast between his two kind of worlds, his worlds without her and the worlds with her. It's like she offered colour and excitement to his world, whereas the world where he makes his money was quite muted. But I understand where you're coming from. Fundamentally, it's a story about a man having power over a woman.
Yes,
You know, but
actually,
I don't think it's as clear cut as that. I think there was an open negotiation
that's
contract
not,
with them there.
yeah, and that's not just what this film's about. And you talk about the transaction. I would accept that argument if her personality does not change completely throughout the film. The spunky Vivian at the start of the film is a passive creature by the end of the film. It seems to me as soon as she becomes conservative, at one point, actually says to address conservatively, it's like he buys her and he molds her into something. And once he's molded her, now she's okay, but her character is never given the chance to kind of speak up again. Like later on, when they're at the polo match and Stookie, that really creepy lawyer friend, tries it on. The Vivian at the start of the film would have told him to fuck off and probably would have battered him or slapped him or punched him away. Now she just gives a really watery look on her face. And there are other more egregious examples that I just thought, okay, I get the transaction thing, but actually this film goes out of its way to, it's almost like they Sandra D her, that she has to be dressed in a certain way, behave in a certain way. He's constantly telling her to stop fidgeting. That scene where he takes her to dinner when he's meeting two businessmen, why has he taken her there? The scene is just designed in order to make her look foolish and to make her look like a fish out of water. And at the same time, it's designed to show that the softening, how women can somehow soften men, you know. So this gruff businessman that he's gone to meet is somehow softened by the presence of Julia Roberts, unable to get cargo out of her. You know, I just wondered why that character had taken, because she doesn't say anything throughout the whole meeting. She doesn't offer any input at all into their discussion. She is there literally to be his decoration. That's all.
Well, in that respect, Phil, who was on the phone, you know, the hideous business partner, said they like women. Take a girlfriend along, take a date along, because it will soften up negotiations a little bit. So right. I think that's the reason why he did that.
But it doesn't give her character anything to do at all, apart from be the comedy element. You know, it kind of it diminishes her a bit, I think.
But it is a comedy.
Later on, well, I didn't find it very funny, I've got to say. You know, and maybe because it was dated, I guess. And yeah, it's a comedy, but the jokes are at the expense of her. She's not in on the joke. You know, she is the joke in that scene. So fair enough, it's a comedy film, but we're laughing at Julia Roberts, not with Julia Roberts. And I just thought the way they kind of altered her character from that sparky, spunky woman at the beginning to this meek, conservative Republican wife, basically, is what she's turned into.
I see what you're saying, but that's the joke. That's the Pygmalion element of it, isn't it? As the fish out of water. And yes, it's funny because it's physical, and I think it's funny because, you know, she's quite a good physical actor.
Yeah, the cast are exemplary. You know, 10 out of 10. Their chemistry is off the charts.
Yeah,
you know, they're super. She is just, you can't take your eyes off her. But I felt that she was incredibly badly served. I mean, later on, when she's at the polo match and Richard Gere's character, Edward Lewis, doesn't like it, she's talking to one of the polo players. He says it like it is. He says, "You are my employee," is what he says to her. You know, that laying bare, this is the dynamic of this relationship. And later on, toward the end of the film, he has the fucking cheek to say, "I never treated you like a prostitute." Really? Really, Richard? Yes, you will, love, because I've just watched fucking 90 minutes of you treating her like a prostitute, saying to your friend she's a hooker, and your friend saying she's a bargain basement prostitute, quoting exactly the script, you know? So, although there's this flimmy-flammery, the film is also at pains to never let us forget that at heart she is a sex worker, and she embodies the kind of cliche of the tart with the heart, which is a deeply problematic cinema trope, you know, because the tart with the heart is somebody who is morally ambiguous. They're in a profession which is, in quotation marks, bad, but they're shown to have a humanity despite the work they do. And Vivian is just another of this cliche, and becomes like a toy thing. I mean, I will go on a bit more about, because I noticed there are lots and lots of little subtle ways the film does its best to keep the Julia Roberts character held down. For example, the first thing we see of her is getting undressed. We see her bra, we see her ass before we actually see her herself. Yet at one point she undresses for Richard Gere. And did you notice that everybody, and this is a real stylistic choice, everybody, wherever they're on location, is told to look at Julia Roberts like they can't believe she's so beautiful. And that at the beginning I thought, okay, fine. But towards the end, it's like everybody on fucking Sunset Boulevard's looking at Julia Roberts. Even the blind man is looking at you because she's so amazingly beautiful. I found that a bit rubbish. The bit where she's in the shop, there's that whole class thing. You're obviously in the wrong place. Please leave. When she goes to the shop, she's not allowed to be in there. But then later on at the races, she's, oh, you look like a lady. But then later on in the same fucking scene, Stuckey says, well, she's a bargain basement prostitute. So she's allowed to have so much femininity, but then the movie draws us back to the attention of what she does. And I find that quite problematic. It's why she's never allowed to elevate or never allowed to fly beyond,
But isn't that just a commentary on people's attitude towards sex workers rather than demeaning herself? Isn't it? I think a lot of it's a commentary on people's attitudes to people and women in general who don't have a good start in life or have fallen, on problematic times, etc. It's a commentary on how people view that kind of person as well. So it's not necessarily demeaning her as much as it's questioning people's superior attitudes towards that kind of person. You could argue that way, couldn't you?
Could do, absolutely.
I think ultimately at the end, I know I'm jumping towards the end, she does get what she wants at the end of it. She forces him. She's
basically a courtesan. She's still going to be kept by a man and in the pay of a man.
She challenges him, doesn't she? He proposes that he puts her up in, buys her a condo and visits her every so often, and then she will become a courtesan. And she says to him, no, I don't want that. I want the fairy tale. And she leaves him at that point because he says he can't offer it. So she's forced him. It's a kind of common story trope, isn't it? So what path is he going to take? And ultimately, he goes back to her. They drive off together on the assumption that actually he's chosen her, he's going to be with her, and they're going to have a relationship together, rather than it being a courtesan holed up in a condo by the beach.
Yeah, but I haven't seen anything from his character that makes me think that's going to happen. And I think it's interesting that we find so much about him and his history and his past, and we find very little about her. Apart from her beginning introduction, when she's talking about cars, the knowledge of cars with boys back home. And later on, when she's talking about how she fell into sex work, with this tinkly romantic piano music and this smile on her face as she describes how she ended up on the streets. That's all we find out about her. Him, we find out about his job, his mother, his father, his wife, his ex-wife, his girlfriend. It's that focus is on him and never about her. And because we've had that focus on him, I'm not convinced at the end of the movie that situation is going to change.
But don't you feel as though, even though it's called Pretty Woman, it's a story about a man. He's the main protagonist in it, and it's about this person that comes into his life to alter his view on the world and his opinion on the world. She's kind of like a catalyst character. I mean, watching the film, you would think this is Julie Roberts' movie because she just steals and dominates every scene that she's in just because of, her star quality. But it is essentially about a man's decision and a man's journey. So I think it seems to me it's natural that his character will be fleshed out more than hers.
I could see that the movie's trying to make us think that. And in 1990, I certainly thought that when I watched this as a 17-year-old. But now, because of the way the movie has put her character and his character, I don't think that. As they roll off towards in the end in the car, I'm not buying it. I think this movie, because of the disservice it does Julia Roberts' character, and because of the way it treats her, it still has the bare bones of that original movie, that darker movie. So we've got this very smoggy LA at the beginning. We've got the juxtaposition of Boulevard of Stars, with the sex workers on it. I think it's Sunset Boulevard, that one. We've got a dead body in a skip, a murdered sex worker. We've got talk of drugs. We've got Vivian's friend who's enthralled her pimp for drugs. Although the film's very careful to say that Vivian doesn't take drugs. And it's also very careful to show that Richard Gere is not looking for a sex worker. It's a pure fluke that they end up with each other. So in some way it tries to protect the two characters. But I think those elements are clearly from the original 3000 movie. And I think that movie is still in there throughout this movie, despite the froth and despite the rom-com of it. Yeah, I know it's a hugely popular film, and I hope I haven't upset anyone with my observations.
Not at all. No, it haven't upset me. I feel, watching it last night, knowing that we were going to come on this podcast, all the things that you've highlighted, I could see littered throughout the movie. The fact that, it is, and looking at it, especially through, 2024 eyes, it is hugely problematic. But I think the same could be said for a lot of movies of that age. Obviously, we're just happen to be referencing it's a movie about sex workers, etc. But I also think it's a real good allegory of corporate greed, of entitlement, of the problems of having money and the problems of excess, etc., and how it makes people. And I think that, the Vivian character is a good kind of contrast to that, ask questions about the morals of this man, of why he's become who he's become, etc., and fights against it in a way that, takes him eventually down this path where he has to make this choice, and ultimately takes a path towards it being morally a better person. Like I say, he is the main protagonist in the movie, so it's him that goes on the journey. Would this film be made today, about a sex worker in the kind of comedy vein of no, probably not. This is a snapshot of 1990, isn't it? It's not a snapshot of people's opinions and moral code today.
Yeah. Absolutely. Do you know what has struck me as kind of interesting is that we talked about Carry On Girls a couple of weeks ago from 1973, which I find a less misogynist film than Pretty Woman, which is something I never, ever thought I'd possibly get my head around. And I find Carry On Girls a more honest film in what it's trying to say about relations between the sexes than Pretty Woman is, So that's one of the great things about this podcast, Dave. We can have our opinions turned around.
Exactly. And I think it's really important what you said. We did a podcast about Man About the House, about the progressive attitudes that programme projected. And you said a really interesting point about, progress isn't linear. For every progressive kind of sitcom or film that is out there, there's one that, that is issued at the same time that isn't progressive. It's, it's regressive in a way, and it still projects these dubious moral codes on people. So, I think Pretty Woman definitely falls into that latter category, doesn't it?
Yeah. And it just struck me as a very Republican film. Very conservative American film. And I'm really pleased you suggested we do it, Dave, because I went into it thinking, this will be great. A little trip down memory lane. Little did I realise that I was going to be left feeling dirty. I was going to be left feeling a bit soiled. I just thought it was really exploitative and a bit ghastly.
Are there any elements of the film that you enjoyed? Dare I ask?
I could honestly, the opera scenes were nice.
Pretty dresses.
I thought her mate was really good, a really good performance.
Obviously, she was there to counterbalance Vivian's opinions, wasn't she? And the journey that Vivian wanted to go down. So what did you think about her? Did you think she was a more realistic or accurate portrayal of the sex worker?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, for sure. Absolutely. She's the one who's dealing with a pimp who there's a hint that she gets abuse from the pimp. She's on drugs. That seems to be, unfortunately, the life of many sex workers. So, again, it's just the honesty of her compared to the dishonesty of the Vivian character, I think. And apparently, I read that for years, so many young women thought that sex work was a viable option because everyone was going to meet a Richard Gere, when actually most sex work is going to be some married man of a certain age who, we don't need to go down that road, but it's not going to be Richard Gere. Yeah, I'm a great recommendation. I will definitely not watch this movie again. And there's even like a really horrible bit of physical violence when that Stooky bloke tries to rape her in the hotel, has a go on her. And that's a really common trope in 80s American movies, especially. The slap a woman across the face is such a thing you see all the fucking time in a certain kind of movie. So to see it in a rom-com not only betrays that dark original script, but again shows, what's this film about? Who is it for? And the fact that Richard Gere has to come in and rescue her, whereas the Vivian at the beginning would have kneed him in the fucking bollocks, I'm sure. So anyway, let's not talk about Pretty Woman anymore.
Well, okay, so it's really interesting that you present these views on Pretty Woman, and I wonder how you feel about the fact that Thelma and Louise was released the year after this, talking about things not being linear.
Yeah, but then if you look at the backlash against Thelma and Louise, which is astonishing, that Republican men thought that Thelma and Louise was going to turn their women lesbian. And there is a huge cultural backlash against that movie when it comes out. So although, Thelma and Louise is a great movie. Again, I haven't seen it for a long time. It'd be quite interesting to watch it. But culturally, Pretty Woman is accepted immediately, is a huge hit. Thelma and Louise, not at all accepted, and takes a long time before it becomes a hit. And is pushed back against furiously by conservative America. So, although we may have a depiction of women in a certain way, the pushback against it means that it takes a while for it to actually scratch the cultural surface. So again, nothing's linear. Thelma and Louise is a great counterpoint, but was radically frowned upon. And American men genuinely lost their fucking minds over Thelma and Louise. They thought that Thelma and Louise was going to bring about the end of American society.
Yeah.
So we like to keep their women in pretty frocks and have them dressed conservatively and look, appropriate. We don't like them when they go crazy and fuck Brad Pitt and then drive off a cliff at the end.
I want to talk about Richard Gere. First of all, I want to talk about Richard Gere, and then I want to talk about Julia Roberts.
Sorry, can I just say one thing about Richard Gere?
Yeah.
God, he's so fucking hot. We're not supposed to objectify.
Here's the thing. Okay, Richard Gere in this movie, I thought was portrayed as hugely unlikable, and therefore, for me, wasn't the kind of romantic male lead. He was just an arsehole in it.
Yeah.
Compare that to a few years prior, Officer and a Gentleman. That's when we're talking about peak Richard Gere for me.
American Gigolo, love. I'm sorry, it's American Gigolo.
Just heard you farting. You're all right. Have you not you haven't soiled yourself, have you?
I'm on the sofa. I'm on a leather sofa. And the new microphone's picking up all the noises clearly.
I thought it was just the thought of Richard Gere made you possibly release yourself.
Get myself on my stop. It's a leather sofa. Thank you.
Okay. I believe you.
Just in case any listeners have heard any noises, expected to me farting for the last however long. I'm on a leather Chesterfield sofa. Look, I'm doing it now. As you were.
Okay, as you were. Okay, Julia Roberts in this movie. Let's discuss just Julia Roberts. And this was, she'd been in a couple of films before this, Mystic Pizza, which I remember, and she'd already filmed Steel Magnolias, which I think might have been released after this. But this was the film that propelled her to superstardom, wasn't it? And I mean, I have to say, from my point of view, she just electrifies the screen. You know, if you want to talk about star quality, and you know, we could talk for hours about what makes a star, a movie star. But I think it's unquantifiable, isn't it? It's just some people have it, some people don't. And in this film, she just has it in spades.
Yeah, you can't keep your eyes off her. She's amazing to look at. She's so photogenic, and she's a great actor.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah, agree with all of that.
Okay, well, that was Pretty Woman. I feel slightly battered and bruised after that, Lee, I have to say. But you haven't suppressed my liking of Pretty Woman, but you certainly made me think a lot more about it. Let's put it that way.
Maybe next time when you watch it, you will feel dirty.
Dirty with Richard Gere.
Dirty in that you're colluding with patriarchy, lols.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so tell us what we're going to be watching next week.
Well, next week, it's going to get a little bit spooky, darling. Because we're going back to 1992 to watch the highly controversial BBC Screen One drama, Ghost Watch, which I'm rather excited about because I love Ghost Watch. And it'll be interesting to see your take on it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've not watched it. I've heard about it, but I've never watched it all the way through. I know it caused a great furore at the time. So I'll be really excited about that. I'm not the best one for horror films. Apart from when I was a kid, my big brother, when he used to babysit for us, used to make us watch horror films like Nightmare on Elm Street or Friday the 13th, and then make us play hide and seek in the dark.
Wow. No wonder you've been traumatized by them. For God's sake, I used to watch them with my nana, and that was a completely different experience. My nana used to rewind the gory bits and go, look at this bit, look at his eyeballs popping out. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. So yeah, well, let's see how we converge on that next week then for Ghost Watch.
Absolutely. So until next week, if you want to catch us on X and Instagram, please do, and then please like and subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and please do leave us a review. We love to hear about all your comments about the podcast. So until next week then, Lee, on The Problematic Gaze.
Au reservoir, David.
Au reservoir.
Bye.
Bye.